It was a typical sunny afternoon in the sleepy suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Greens. The birds chirped lazily over manicured lawns, sprinklers hissed in the distance, and the faint smell of barbecue wafted through the air. But the peace was shattered, as usual, by her. Karen Montgomery, self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, drove her silver SUV into the community parking lot like a general rolling into battle. Her oversized sunglasses glinted in the sun as she steered into the freshly painted disabled parking spot near the clubhouse. She grinned smugly, ignoring the bright blue wheelchair symbol. The HOA board had just added the new disabled space last week after a long debate about accessibility. Karen, however, claimed she needed it. She told everyone she had a bad knee and couldn't walk far, though nobody had ever seen her limp. That afternoon, as she stepped out of her SUV in leopard print heels, mind you, she pulled out a laminated placard and hung it from her rearview mirror with a flourish. A few neighbors muttered under their breath as she strutted into the clubhouse for the HOA meeting. "Does it look very disabled to me," whispered Mrs. Green from down the street, shaking her head. Inside, Karen presided over the meeting like a monarch. She complained about unruly kids riding bikes on sidewalks, about weeds in someone's flower beds, about cars parked an inch over the line. But she became positively indignant when someone dared bring up her use of the disabled spot. "That spot is for anyone with a placard," Karen snapped. "And as you can see, I have mine." End of discussion. The room fell silent. Nobody wanted to argue with her. That was until he showed up. At the back of the room stood a tall man in a worn army jacket, leaning on a crutch. His name was Jack Reynolds, a retired veteran who had moved to Maplewood a few months earlier. Jack had lost his left leg overseas. He was quiet and unassuming, but today, his patience had worn thin. When the meeting ended, and everyone shuffled out, Jack slowly made his way to the parking lot. There was Karen again, standing by her SUV, chatting loudly on her phone. He stopped at the blue line spot and shook his head. "You know," he said calmly, "some of us actually need this." Karen whipped around, her face already flushed. "Excuse me? And just who are you to talk to me like that?" Jack just stood there, staring at her, his single leg planted firmly. "The guy this space was meant for," he said quietly. Karen's jaw dropped. And that was just the beginning. For a second, Karen didn't know what to say. Her lips flapped like a fish out of water as she tried to summon her usual cutting sarcasm, but the sight of Jack, tall, broad-shouldered, balancing on his crutch, rattled her. Then, like always, her pride took over. "You think you can just waltz in here and lecture me?" she spat, planting her hands on her hips. "I've lived here for 20 years. I've served on the HOA board for 12. I have a condition, thank you very much. My doctor signed off on this placard." Jack raised an eyebrow. "A condition, huh?" He glanced down at her 3-inch heels. "Sure looks like you're struggling." That little jab made Karen's cheeks turn crimson. She took a step forward, pointing her manicured finger at his chest. "You don't know me. You don't know what I go through every day, and frankly, it's none of your business. If you don't like how things are done here, maybe you should move." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. A few people tried to pretend they weren't watching, but most were openly staring. Mrs. Green from down the street muttered, finally, someone saying it, under her breath. Jack didn't flinch. He just leaned slightly on his crutch and looked her square in the eye. "Lady," he said evenly, "I fought overseas so people like you could live their cushy little lives. I've been shot at, I've bled, and I've lost a leg, and you're standing here pretending you can't walk while you steal spaces from people who actually need them." The crowd gasped at his words. Even Karen seemed momentarily taken aback, but she quickly recovered, letting out a harsh laugh. "Oh, don't you play the war hero card with me," she snapped. "You think just because you got hurt, the whole world owes you something? News flash, lots of people have disabilities, and I don't see a rule that says this space is just for you." Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't yell. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd heard enough. Then he turned to the onlookers. "Anyone here thinks she deserves that spot more than someone with one leg?" The silence was deafening. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, but not a single neighbor came to her defense. Instead, she heard whispers, shameful. About time someone called her out. Unbelievable. Her temper flared. "Fine," she barked. "If you think you're so righteous, then take it. See if I care." And with that, she shoved his crutch out from under him. Jack stumbled, and the crowd cried out. Karen froze, realizing what she'd just done. And that was when someone dialed 911. The crutch clattered to the pavement, and Jack fell hard onto his side with a grunt. The crowd gasped in unison, a few neighbors rushing forward to help him. Karen stood frozen, her arms still half raised where she'd swatted at him, her face a mask of shock and rage. "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" Mrs. Green cried, bending down to help Jack up. "I'm fine," Jack muttered through gritted teeth, wincing as two men from the neighborhood hoisted him back upright. He steadied himself on his crutch, his knuckles white. Karen's shock dissolved into defensive anger. "Don't look at me like that. He provoked me. He was harassing me." "Karen," one of the neighbors interrupted sternly, "you assaulted him. We all saw it." "I did not. He was intimidating me, making me feel unsafe." Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. But it was too late. The flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser appeared at the end of the parking lot, and a pair of uniformed officers stepped out. The crowd parted to let them through. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked, surveying the tense scene. "She knocked him down," Mrs. Green said firmly, pointing to Karen. "She hit his crutch and made him fall." Karen's jaw dropped. "That's a lie," she cried. "These people are just ganging up on me because they're jealous of my position on the board. I'm the victim here." Jack, now standing again, spoke up quietly. "All I did was ask her to stop taking the disabled space." She lashed out. One of the officers turned to Karen. "Ma'am, do you have a medical condition requiring you to park here?" Karen thrust her placard at him. "Of course I do. My doctor signed this." The officer studied it, then raised an eyebrow. "We'll need to verify this with the DMV, and in the meantime, we have multiple witnesses saying you struck a disabled man and knocked him down. That's assault." Karen's face turned pale. "You can't be serious," she screeched. "I'm on the HOA board. I know my rights." The officers didn't flinch. "Ma'am, turn around, please." Karen sputtered as they took her hands and began cuffing her. "This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? You can't do this to me. I have influence. People like me here." But the looks on her neighbors' faces told her otherwise. "Tell it to the judge," one of the officers said flatly, leading her toward the cruiser. Jack leaned on his crutch, watching silently as Karen was placed in the back seat, still protesting at the top of her lungs. Finally, he shook his head and muttered, "About time." The crowd murmured in agreement. The police cruiser's door slammed shut with a heavy thud, muffling Karen's furious cries inside. Her neighbors stood in stunned silence as the officers drove off, the flashing lights disappearing around the corner. Jack exhaled slowly, he feeling the adrenaline finally begin to end. His hand still trembled slightly as he leaned on his crutch, his one good leg aching from the fall. Mrs. Green stepped up beside him. "You okay, Jack?" That was something. Jack forced a small smile. "I've been through worse," he said. "But thanks." The crowd began to disperse, some muttering to each other, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Nobody, not a single soul, seemed to feel sorry for Karen. If anything, they seemed relieved. That woman's been a thorn in everyone's side for years, one man said under his breath. Finally caught up with her. Jack nodded faintly. It's not about me. It's about what's right. That space was meant for someone who needs it, not for someone who wants to feel important. Mrs. Green smiled warmly at him. Well, you've got more courage in one leg than she's got in her whole body. A few others chimed in, offering their support. We'll make sure she's removed from the board after this, one neighbor promised. Another added, we should have stood up to her sooner. Sorry you had to be the one to do it. Jack appreciated their words but stayed humble. It's just a parking spot, he said softly. But it's also respect, and that matters. The next morning, the news of Karen's arrest spread through Maplewood Greens like wildfire. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation and posted it online, where it quickly went viral. Comments poured in from strangers all over the country, praising Jack's calm demeanor and condemning Karen's behavior. By the end of the week, Karen's name had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of entitlement gone wrong. The HOA held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to remove her from the board. Her house even went up for sale shortly after. Jack, meanwhile, quietly went about his life. He continued to attend HOA meetings, but now he was greeted with nods, handshakes, and smiles. People thanked him for speaking up, for setting an example. One afternoon, Mrs. Green caught up with him by the clubhouse. Jack, she said, you changed things around here for the better. Thank you. Jack just shrugged modestly, glancing at the freshly painted blue space now sitting empty and waiting for someone who truly needed it. Sometimes, he replied, it just takes standing up, even if you only have one leg to stand on. And for once, the neighborhood truly felt like a community again. If you enjoyed watching Karen get served a big slice of justice, and you love seeing everyday heroes stand up to entitlement, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment telling us what you think. Let's keep calling out bad behavior, one story at a time.